Greetings, everyone, and thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for the latest edition of Spatial Insider webinar brought to you by NextBillion and Foursquare. My name is Jim Welch. I'm the head of solutions engineering for NextBillion here in the Americas. We are a industry-leading spatial data, location intelligence, AI company providing platform services that help enterprises build, deploy, scale, and manage their own enterprise location intelligence platform. I'll be your host today, and we're fortunate to be joined today by our distinguished guest, Vikram Gundeti, Vice President and Distinguished Engineer at Foursquare. See, he even has the title Distinguished. Vikram's a tech pioneer. He has more than 20 years of experience, including influential initiatives at Amazon, on Echo and Alexa services. He's now driving the development of the location intelligence platform at Foursquare. I might also add, while also being generous with his time to join informational webinars such as this. Foursquare is a icon / mainstay / veteran in the location technology space, has a rich and fascinating history that I'm sure we're going to get into a little bit later. I know personally I've engaged with Foursquare at least 3 times over the course of my career, and I'm excited to be chatting with them again. Today, Vikram and I are discussing the importance of location data as it relates to making informed, relevant, and timely business decisions, how to detect and apply intelligence from location data, methods for enhancing customer experience using platform intelligence, and the impact that an intelligence source of location data can have on overall business decision-making and outcomes. Just keep in mind, we'll include time towards the end of the webinar to answer any questions you might have. So feel free to drop them in the box below, and we'll get to them towards the end of the meeting. With all that being said, let's dive in. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Vikram so he can tell us, if he wants to tell us more about himself and get some background on Foursquare's journey in location intelligence. So over to you, Vikram.
Hey, first of all, thanks for the kind intro, Jim. I'm Vikram. I've been with Foursquare for a little over a year, so I'm relatively new to this whole geospatial domain. But I've been fascinated by the real-world applications of this data and the untapped potential of this space. Prior to joining Foursquare, I was with Amazon for about 15 years, fortunate enough to be the founding engineer on Alexa, and got the opportunity to work on some of the foundational systems there. So a little bit about Foursquare, and a lot of times people ask, like, hey, is this company still there, right? Like, because people know Foursquare to be the consumer app that was, or the social network that was popular in the 2010s and popularized this notion of check-ins. Towards the later end of the decade, though, like Foursquare did this pivot to enterprise and packaged a lot of the cool technology that made Foursquare app compelling, right? Like, and made it available to developers and enterprises. And today, through a series of acquisitions, we have a broad portfolio of enterprise products. One, we have mobile APIs and SDKs, which help mobile app developers build compelling experiences, location-centric experiences in their apps. We have data products, places and moments. Like, we have 200 million places all over the world, constantly validated by real humans that use our APIs and apps. And we also have a visual analytics tool called Foursquare Studio, which helps analysts and scientists visualize large swaths of geospatial data and infer insights from them. We also are in the advertising space. We provide solutions for doing online to offline attribution. That is, in other words, helping enterprises and understand the effectiveness of their ad spend, right? But at the core layer, what we have is these real data assets, which are very unique to Foursquare, the places and the movements of people around those places, which are upon which everything else is built upon. So that's what Foursquare is currently into.
Okay, thanks, Vikram. I think it's an interesting journey, certainly from the standpoint of being a B2C company, making that pivot to B2B. But I also think, it gives a certain brand awareness. So people like myself who are, on the B2B side as well, have this foundational understanding and knowledge of Foursquare. And at least there's an awareness, whereas we're not just saying, oh, Foursquare, who are they? So yeah, it's an amazing story. So can you elaborate a little more on Foursquare's movement data, what that is, what insights can be gleaned from it, and maybe share some scenarios where movement data yields some form of insight?
Yeah, Foursquare's movement data is about so historically, if you look at the roots of Foursquare, it's as I said, like we introduced this concept of a check-in where people go into a place and check in that they are there. So from that data, we built models which help us map like GPS signals coming from phones to their presence in a specific location. So now you might think, hey, this seems like a very simple problem. But anytime you're in a mobile phone and if you open up where you are, sometimes it shows you on the other side of the road. So there is a margin of error in how GPS captures the location. So Foursquare has been able to build models based on our check-in data to accurately map where people are given a specific GPS location. Now, once we have this movements data, we can derive a lot of insights and we can derive a lot of other properties of the user from that, like where are their home locations, where are they visiting, what is a pattern in their visits, which stores are they going to after visiting a certain store. Typically, when you think about movement data, people think traffic, right? Like in terms of like where are people moving? I think traffic gives you insights into where people are, where congestion is. And the way I look at Foursquare data is it tells you why people are moving in terms of, and to explain with an example, let's say an intersection is congested, right? Like at a certain hour of the day. Traffic data, you can look at it and say, hey, this intersection is congested. But if you look at Foursquare data, what the kind of insights we can glean from that data are that, hey, there is a strip mall where people are typically spending 1 hour of their time every day or every weekday around 11 a.m., between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. And this intersection is the closest to this. Or the other thing is that like, hey, here's a grocery store and people from 3 different neighborhoods are coming into that grocery stores because that is the only grocery store nearest to all those 3 neighborhoods, or it has the right. Now take that data and let's look at different verticals. How can they leverage that information, right? If you take a government agency, a local government, they can look at like, hey, this seems like there is some congestion. They can plan for better transit options within that, or more transit options within that. You can look at a grocery store or like a retail store, and they can see if this is the only grocery store that is serving 3 neighborhoods, is there a different site I can put up to capture that demand, right? Closer to the other neighborhoods. If you take a rideshare company or like a grocery pickup company like Instacart or something like that, they can manage demand based on, I know people are here at this time. They might need some services, and based on that, like they can plan for stationing their cab drivers or whatever around that particular area in that particular time. So by this notion of attaching why people are there at a certain point, or the other example is, we know this store, people typically go to this store, like get coffee after getting their groceries, but the nearest coffee shop is 2 blocks away. Now that can be used by the grocery store to say, I'm going to put a Starbucks in on-site Starbucks or something like that to make the customer stay in their location longer, right? If this is such valuable data, one of the questions I've asked, like when I've tried to learn myself, was like, why is it not being used more widely? And the problem is that just to get to this information, the amount of investment a company needs to make in terms of, even if we give our moment data, the number of other sources they need to join to get these insights is much higher, and you need to have some specialized software like PostGIS or something that will enable you to do this at scale. And most of these companies do not have the geospatial expertise. That's what Foursquare is currently trying to solve in terms of providing what we call as a geospatial knowledge graph, which connects all these different pieces of information. In the example I talked about, we are connecting data about like neighborhood boundaries, people's home locations, their visit patterns, and roads for getting the nearest intersections and all. And a company that is focusing on retail or any other thing will not have the expertise to build and invest in getting all these data sources. So part of what we are doing through the knowledge graph is bringing all these sources so that you can make the information easily accessible to anyone who wants to use this.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think, like you said, Foursquare is uniquely positioned to construct and build that knowledge graph. There are a lot of opportunities to access location data either through open source sources or commercial sources, but a lot of them lack, that context that can come from companies like Foursquare. So the quality of that location data is absolutely critical to a lot of the use cases that we come across. So, I know everyone on this call is probably familiar with use cases or user stories or product requirements where location is a distinct component. In NextBillion's domain, we do a lot of work with delivery companies. So, the user story might be constructed as, as a delivery driver, I want to receive stepwise instructions on how to move my car from my current location to the delivery location. And in a lot of cases, our customers are sort of assuming that those two locations are known, are well established. But as we find out, in operation, that's typically not the case. You referenced the inaccuracy of the GPS location. So that's the origin position for that driver. And then you've got the destination, which, a lot of the services that our customers are using or that, they rely on, that end location is usually static, fixed, and doesn't change over time. So you're always getting the wrong answer every time you ask for that. So it's really important, as you pointed out, having that contextual awareness and that knowledge of location data and making sure that it is really yielding the proper business outcomes.
Actually, like even if you have a geocode or lat long associated with a location, there are different kinds of lat long associated with the same place. Like there is an entry lat long, there is a drop off location. Like a ride hail company like Uber does not need the entry lat long, but they need the point at which you can drop off to reach that particular venue. Or and if you have a residential building, you have the house, and how do you enter? If you're doing a delivery, then you need to have the lat long of the loading dock. So there is a lot of rich information. We always associate like a POI to have one location in terms of a lat long, but depending on the application, there are different kinds of pieces that may need to be available to serve different use cases.
Yep, absolutely. And Foursquare has a very horizontal platform services that you make available to a lot of different industry verticals. I was doing some reading recently about the financial services sector, investment sector, that being able to take advantage of what you were describing in terms of movement data in order to factor those into investment decisions that you're making. So it's something that I wouldn't typically think about. Obviously it's outside of NextBillion's domain, but it makes perfect sense. So if you can get leading indicators of performance of, say, retail stores based on foot traffic, and you can have more information than, say, others who are in the market, it just makes perfect sense to be able to leverage that and make quicker decisions and making more actionable decisions.
Yeah, and it's not just site selection. Like there are a broad swath of investment directions, investment decisions, if you think of it, right? Like one is you want to identify the site where you want to put up a new store. And how do you do that is, it could be based on there is a certain demographic of people you're targeting, and or you have like the other interesting thing we want to be working to enable through our knowledge graph is you have a store that is working, that is doing well, and it has a location. Now you want to identify what a similar location based on certain characteristics, whether it is the demographic of that site or the average income group or whatever other attributes, or it is closest to some other destinations. And based on that, you want to plan a different, identify similar sites within the state or the metro so that you can plan and drive a similar kind of outcome for your store. So there are a lot of different applications of driving business decisions. One other example is not just starting a new store, but how do you stock up items in a store based on demand, right? Especially this happens in football season where you have a lot of traffic coming into your restaurants and they have certain tastes, and we see certain kinds of food groups or like food items selling more in bars during the football season than in other season. Or a company like Coca-Cola wants to identify new stores that have opened up so that they can go and stock their products in there. All these are enabled through a combination of our places data and our movements data, joined with a bunch of other sources.
Sure, that's great. And we hear all the time about the importance of location relating to business operations, and you're highlighting a lot of that in this discussion, and customer experience. I guess one question I have for you is, what do you think the industry is missing in leveraging, curated quality location data? What opportunities exist that you feel are being missed?
I think, this is, again, as I always say, I'm still a newcomer to the space. And when I first came into this domain, my understanding and a lot of airwaves around geospatial data are centered around mapping and routing, because that's the most obvious consumer application of location data. But as I said, like as I outlined some of the use cases where location data is critical to business decision making, right? Like I'll give you one more example. When there is, let's say you have a vacation rental company like Airbnb, and you want to price the rental, somebody's putting up their home for a rental and you want to price it appropriately. The key information that you have is the location. And today, for those companies, all they have is that lat long of that particular location, right? Like location of the rental. Their price prediction models are using a bunch of other features, but what Foursquare can do now with some of our investments is that take that lat long and convert it into hundreds of features about the location that they can use in their models, whether it is density of POIs within a certain radius, or distance to the nearest recreational space or recreational places, whether it is water bodies, beaches, or depending on the kind of rental. And all these can drive better correlation to the right pricing strategy for them. The other thing that I think we'll see a shift in this is, if you look at the ad industry with all the privacy concerns coming up, personalized targeting, individualized targeting is going to become a lot more difficult, right? Like getting personal and getting access to personal information is going to be a lot more difficult. What we'll see as a shift is, like, in the absence of personal information, or in the restricted access to personal, in the world of restricted access to personal information, location can play a key role in driving contextualized targeting or advertising, right? For instance, we can say, hey, if you want to target people in the 25 to 35 year age group who are interested in outdoor activities or have these other interests, these are the locations at which you can find them, and these are the times at which they're likely to be there. And this has a broad application in terms of whether you're using the digital billboards in those particular locations to target at the right time, or you're just generally using the mobile phone targeting when people are at that particular location. So those kinds of insights are very useful. And yeah, so these are all applications that have nothing to do with mapping, right? Like that's the key part.
Sure.
Trying.
Yeah, definitely. I think mapping is a commodity at this point. I think it's the value of the things like the knowledge graph and the inferences that a platform can make, especially in an environment, just as you stated, that where the sharing of data is increasingly more restrictive. I think Europe has certainly led in that area, and then mobile platforms such as the opt-outs in different for tracking that data cannot be relied on anymore. So what you're left with are powerful platforms that have the ability to infer and to learn from other data signals. So that's key for sure. So let's see. I do want to add one additional, this is my advertorial here, for our respective development platforms. So, at NextBillion, we have the ability for developers to come to our ecosystem, sign up, and to experiment, trial, proof of concept, different approaches to our location platform. And it makes it easy to engage and to really get started to exercise our APIs and SDKs to trial out and see what you can do with location data in terms of your businesses. I know I recently re-onboarded myself, if that's a word, into the Foursquare developer portal. I found it to be really easy with lots of samples. And yeah, Vikram, I don't know if you wanted to comment a little bit about your ecosystem and how you engage with developers.
I think if you look at how our developer ecosystem has evolved, like we started as a consumer app and we built a lot of APIs that drove those experiences for consumer apps. And we exposed a lot of APIs that corresponded to what we had expertise in. And now, as we are seeing the shift, multiple apps are building more location-centric experiences within their thing. Like whether you're using a travel and hospitality app or like booking an air flight ticket, then you have recommendations for places coming in there. So our developer strategy is very important. A developer APIs or ecosystem is very important to our strategy. Not only because we feel like we can help our customers build better experiences in their app, but because it's also every time someone touches a place or provides a check-in, it improves our own underlying data quality. So we have this. We are I think Foursquare is uniquely situated in the sense that it's the only independent location provider that has this continuous feedback loop, whether it is through its apps or its developer ecosystem, to provide feedback on our places. And that is very important for us because in the location-centric world or location-centric assets, things are always changing, right? Like the real world is always changing. The places are always changing. There are new locations coming up. And getting this, driving the usage through our developer APIs is important to us. And I'm glad that you feel the experience is easy, and though we think there is a lot to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your team probably has similar experiences. We get a lot from our developer community in terms of thinking of or seeing new ideas, new use cases that we all think we thought of everything. Obviously, we haven't, and there's an opportunity to learn from that large development community and get their feedback, and ultimately tie those back into products and services that we develop. So yeah, I would urge you, if you're listening to this, take a look at both developer ecosystems and see if it aligns with your goals and objectives. So let me take a look here at the chat box. I think our question, we don't have a ton of questions to go through, but let's start with I think so we had one question about, so am I looking at the right place here? Verticals that seem to benefit the most from movement data. I think we touched upon that in our discussion through different examples that Vikram provided. Is there anything else that you wanted to add there, Vikram?
I think the thing that just a quick the kind of use cases, if you think of it a broad category, I touched upon specific things, but the way we are thinking about our knowledge graph and the examples, the use cases it will drive is like there are two dimensions, right? Like in our knowledge graph, one is the space, is the dimension. Space is one dimension, or location is one dimension, and time is another dimension. Now you can organize a lot of assets around the location, and you can look at how those assets changed over a period of time. And what I mean by that is like you can look at how so one use case we think about it is like, how do you identify new establishments? And the way we can do that with our data is like we can see where people are spending. Are there places where people are spending time, where people are spending more time compared to what they did 6 months ago? Or are there places where people are spending time and they didn't do it before in 3 months ago, right? Like, so that's our way of identifying new places. And this could be interesting for a lot of businesses, right? Like Amazon wants to put up a new locker. Where do they go? Like they can find places where people are spending time already and then put those things over there. And on the space dimension, you can look at some of the things. I think this is one thing I always say is that like all our location experiences are catered to the human consumption. We put things on a map and we can identify where there are dense areas and all that. But how can you ask an API like, hey, what are the top malls in this particular city where people are spending a lot of time or spending a lot of money, right? And that we can do with our data using footfall, like by using building footprints, like place information and how they are clustered together. And you can have different levels of insights at different aggregations of space blocks. And what I mean by that, like you can have neighborhood level insights. You can ask questions about where do people living in this neighborhood typically go for lunch or dinner, right? Like that's a better indicator of the popular restaurants in this area as opposed to a Yelp 5-star or 3-star review, right? So any experience you can think of or any problem you can think of, by attaching it to our real world data that we have, it brings a lot of nuance to your decision making, as opposed to broad, like what are the top restaurants in this area, as opposed to answering, like especially if it is a work neighborhood. This is typically a work neighborhood where people work, and where are people working here going for lunch. That's a better indicator of popularity than some star rating, right? Like so it just unlocks a lot of, you can think of anything you can aggregate on a space scale and a time scale, and we will be able to answer those questions, and that drives a lot of applications.
Right. And I think there are a couple other questions here that kind of go in the same direction, and it's around the area of privacy, data security. How does Foursquare and others sort of mitigate misuse of location data by your partners and customers? So you could comment on that a little bit.
Yeah, when we are talking about the geospatial knowledge graph, you can think of it akin to a social graph, but in a social graph, a person or a human is the key actor around which all the information is organized. In our case, it is the location. So by way of doing that, we are looking more for patterns of data attached to a location as opposed to individualized information. So this allows us, and again, I gave the example of advertising where you want to understand, instead of targeting specific people, you're now targeting, hey, I want to target these kinds of people. Where are they likely to be found? And you're targeting those locations when they are in the proximity of those locations, right? Again, that's a different kind of a avenue location data or building a location fingerprint creates, right? Like, and then similarly for e-commerce kind of like a retail store, you want to understand the share of foot traffic. You're looking at personal data in aggregates as opposed to an individual level, right? So that's where we think this trend. I mean, the current trends, the headwinds in privacy and advertising space are going to be tailwinds for us as we use location as the key actor as opposed to an individual.
Yeah, good point. And I think having the experience and the legacy of a vendor who is kind of designed with privacy and data security in mind is, goes down to your, someone making a selection for someone that's going to be providing these services. You really have to keep that in mind is have they been there, have they designed for it versus, someone who is, maybe early to this market and may not be thinking about those types of privacy concerns. Well, I think that that does it for the questions that we had. I think we'll close off here and let Vikram. Do you have any closing thoughts or anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, the one thing I would say is like when people say, "Hey, is Foursquare still alive?" I think my answer to that these days has been Foursquare is everywhere. Whether you use an Uber app or a Redfin app or a dating app like Bumble, you're using Foursquare services. So yeah.
All right. Well, I just want to say thank you to Vikram today. Thank you for taking time, and we really appreciate your insights. And thanks to everybody for joining and your insightful questions. Thank you much.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you.